Scruffy Piper, written by Justin Richards. On the outer edge of the expanding human empire, Space Station Hamlyn stood guard against invasion. It was located in the Considine Rift, through which any force would have to strike if it intended to attack the Empire. In the early years of the Third Cyber War, it was Space Station Hamlyn that stood between the frail humans and the advancing armies of the Cybermen. The station was equipped with the latest X-ray laser weapon and could withstand almost any assault. The Cybermen, for their part, were well aware that Hamlyn's X-ray lasers would penetrate the hulls of even the most advanced battleships, so they kept their distance, biding their time in a nearby asteroid belt. They knew that the only way they could launch a successful attack on Space Station Hamlyn was if the X-ray lasers were first put out of action. And, to do that, the Cybermen would have to somehow infiltrate the station. Of all the weapons in their own impressive arsenal, the Cybermen had one that was ideally suited for this task. The Cybermats. Converted from small animals, just as the Cybermen themselves were converted from human beings, the Cybermats were small cybernetic creatures, each about the size and shape of a large rat. They could be programmed to complete a specific task, and could home in on human brainwaves, targeting their victims, and then destroying them. The Cybermen, hidden in the asteroid belt, had access to hundreds of Cybermats, all of which they flew to the edge of a Considine Rift. Too small to register on any detectors, the Cybermats slipped past the space station's weapon system. They latched onto the outside hull of the station and burned their way inside. Then, the instant they were inside the station, they resealed the hull behind them. A momentary drop in air pressure was the only clue that anything was amiss. A single drop in pressure might ordinarily have been dismissed as a false reading of the station's instruments, or some sort of glitch in the atmosphere pumps. Of them so close together, however, soon attracted the attention of the station's security chief. He ordered a search of a section near the outer hull, where the pressure drops had been recorded. But the Cybermats were adept at hiding themselves. Their missions depended on stealth and concealment. They intended to get the weapons system and destroy the X-ray lasers before the humans even realized they were here. If they were detected, the Cybermats would fight their way through, but, like their masters, they preferred to keep to the shadows and strike in secret. So, when the security chief's guards searched the outer hull, they did not find a single Cybermat. What they did find, however, was a large blue box that had mysteriously appeared in one of the loading bays. As the guards stared in surprise, wondering what exactly the box was, and just how it had got there, a door at the front swung open. A scruffy man in a dark baggy jacket and checked trousers stepped out. He wore an interested expression that soon turned to a frown and concern when he saw the guards approaching him with their weapons raised. He turned and called back into the box. "I think perhaps you two had better stay in here for now." It was unclear who he could possibly be talking to, however, for it did not look as though there was much room for anyone else inside. Then he pulled the door shut behind him and raised his hands in surrender. Two guards promptly stepped forward, took him by each arms, and marched him to the chief, who was busy examining the station's security systems. The chief was not quite sure what to do with this scruffy man. He appeared to be a complete fool, and yet somehow he had got past the most efficient security screening in the 9 Nebulae. What's more, he claimed to have no idea where he was. As soon as the chief told him, he clapped his hands together and made a comment that suggested he knew exactly where Space Station Hamlyn was located, and a good deal about its construction, much of which was confidential. His eyes gleamed when he caught sight of the station's main security systems. "Tell us who you are," the chief said to the scruffy man, who had now made his way over the security system panel. "Where have you come from, and why are you here?" "This drop in pressure, does it hurt you often?" the scruffy man asked, completely ignoring the questions that the chief had just put to him. The chief was not used to being ignored, but he was as baffled by the pressure drops as the way the strange man had. So he decided he might as well answer. "It is not something we've noticed before today," he admitted. "But, as you can see from the display, there have been dozens in a very short space of time." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I wonder," he said. "Do you mind?" And, without waiting for an answer, the man adjusted several of the controls on this panel, bringing up the streams of information. One of the readouts he pulled up, the chief noticed, required the chief's own personal password to access it. A password which the man could not have known, and had not even entered. Whoever he was, this man obviously knew what he was doing. In the chief's mind, that made him a possible threat. For the moment, though, the chief let the man examine the data. "And your men were trying to discover what caused these drops in pressure where they found me, were they?" the man asked at last. The chief nodded. "I thought there might be some sort of problem with the outer hull, perhaps causing some short leaks of air from the station." The man nodded, smiling. "But they didn't find anything, did they? Apart from me, of course." The chief was thought to admit that they had not. They tested the hull, and it seems to be secure and intact. He added defensively. The scruffy man pressed his index finger in the corner of his mouth as he considered the situation. "I've seen something like this before," he said quietly. "What about scratches?" "Scratches?" asked the chief. The scruffy man nodded. "Scratches, yes, on the metal surface close to the hull. As if something hard made of metal had been dragged across it. Any sign of anything like that?" The chief turned to the two guards who had brought in the scruffy man. "Well?" he asked them. The guards shook their head. "We weren't looking for scratches," one of them said. The scruffy man raised an eyebrow. "Then I suggest you go and look now," he said. The guards turned to their chief. "You think this is important?" the chief demanded of the man, who blinked in surprise. "Important?" the man replied. "Well, I suppose that rather depends on whether or not you want your station to be left defenseless when the Cybermen attack." Now it was the chief's turn to look surprised. Only he and the most senior staff knew that just an hour ago, cyber ships had been detected in the asteroid belt. Since they had the X-ray lasers to protect the station, there seemed no point in worrying the rest of the crew with the news. "Go back through the whole area," the chief told the guards now, "and check for scratches." The scruffy man jumped to his feet and clapped his hands together. "Splendid!" he announced. "I'll come with you." The guards led the way to the access corridor that ran around the station. This was where the system had recorded the drop in air pressure, inside the main hull. The scruffy man fell to his knees and produced a magnifying glass from one of his pockets. "Ah, yes," he said, quietly nodding. He straightened and stood up, then handed the magnifying glass to the chief and gestured for him to take a look. Sure enough, when the chief peered through the glass, he could see scratches quite clearly on the metal floor. "And what does this tell us?" the chief asked. "It tells us we're in trouble," said the scruffy man. One of the guards piped up. "So what do we do, sir?" It was the scruffy man who answered. He put away his magnifying glass, then dusted his hands together. "We follow the scratches," he said, very, very carefully. He dropped to his knees again and proceeded to crawl along the corridor, staring intently at the metal floor. The chief and the two guards followed closely behind. After a few minutes, the chief began to wonder how long he should let this strange male run around the station before accepting that it was in fact quite mad and locking him up. The man came abruptly to a stop. He turned to look up at the chief, indicating with his finger to his lips that everyone be quiet. Then he pointed to a maintenance duct in the wall just ahead of them. It was close to the floor, and the chief could see that the grill which covered the duct had been cut away. The man got to his feet and stepped gingerly towards the broken grill. The chief moved forward and put a hand on his shoulder to stop him. He gestured for the two guards to approach the duct first instead. Closer to the duct now, the chief thought he could see something in the shadows behind the grill. There was a faint red glow. One of the guards bent down to peer inside the duct. As the chief watched, the red glow grew a little brighter and resolved itself into 2 points of light. Points like eyes staring out from the darkness. Suddenly, there was a blur of silver as something leaped from inside the duct and landed on the floor right in front of the guards. The chief stared in disbelief as the silver creature that had appeared, its eye glowing red. Small antennae protruded from its head, and below the luminous eyes was the mouth filled with sharp metal teeth. Segmented silver tail swung slowly back and forth, as if the creature was deciding what to do next. "I think we should all back away very slowly," the scruffy man said. Before either of the guards could move, the metal creature's eyes glowed a brighter, more fiery red. One of the guards cried out in pain, clutching his hands to his head. His gun clattered to the floor. Moments later, the guard fell down beside his gun. The second guard immediately raised his own weapon and opened fire. A laser blast cut the metal creature full on. One of its antennae was shorn off, its tail convulsed, and the creature flipped onto the side. The guard stepped forward, taking aim again, but the scruffy man darted forward and caught his sleeve. "Don't destroy it," he said urgently. "We need to examine it." He stepped closer to the metal creature, which continued to spasm and twitch. "I don't think it's dangerous anymore." As he spoke, the creature gave a final shudder and stood still. The chief was already calling for medical assistance for the injured guard. The scruffy man quickly inspected the guard and said, "He needs immediate attention, but it should be all right." "What is that thing?" the chief demanded as the man carefully lifted the metal creature up and examined it. "It's a cybermat," the man told him. One of the drops in pressure you noticed was this little fellow cutting its way through the hole and then filling the hole up behind it. "One of the drops?" the chief said. "But there were dozens." The man nodded grimly, which means the Cybermen sent dozens of Cybermets. "I imagine they were programmed to locate and destroy your defenses. They are operating in stealth mode at the moment, and only become hostile if they are discovered. Unless we act quickly, they will disable your X-ray lasers and then attack the crew, and the Cybermen will follow." "So what can we do?" The chief's face was now set in still determination. "We can examine this little turtle and see what it tells us." The scruffy little man broke into a sudden smile. "Now I wonder if you have a laboratory handy." In spite of the scruffy man's apparent knowledge and enthusiasm, the chief still did not entirely trust him. Therefore, he stayed in the laboratory, along with the station's most senior scientists, as the man examined the damaged Cybermet. "They are mean on human brainwaves," the man explained as he worked. "Luckily, they can only latch onto one set of brainwaves at a time, although the Cybermen will overcome that particular limitation in a few decades." In light of the urgency of the situation, they now found themselves in. The chief chose to overlook this loud statement. He was starting to get used to the scruffy man's strange way of speaking. "We need to find these Cybermats and destroy them," said the chief. "Guards, follow the scratch marks and let's hunt these pets down one by one." "You could do that," the scruffy man said, without looking up from his work probing the inside of a metal creature's head. "However, I doubt you have the time, or enough men, and you'll probably lose quite a few in the process. Now," he continued, looking up at last, "my way is better." The chief looked stunned. He was not used to being told what to do. "Your way?" he echoed. Are you telling me you know a better way to destroy these cybermats? Oh, yes, the man said, as if was obvious. It's all a question of finding the right frequency. With the help of the station scientist, the Scruffy man set up a series of devices that could emit sound on different frequencies. They then connected the devices to the inside of the Cyberman's head. A screen showed a magnified view of the brains of the creature. The Scruffy man watched the screen carefully while the scientist operated the devices. As the scientist tweaked the dials and changed settings, different tones sounded. Some were low buzzes, other high-pitched wails that made the chief's ears ache. "There!" the man exclaimed suddenly. "That one again, please." By this time, they had been working for over an hour, with no apparent progress. Now, however, the man was hopping excitedly from one foot to the other. "That's it!" he declared. "That's what we need!" The chief was thoroughly confused by now. "You believe this sound alone will destroy the submats?" he asked the man, who was confusedly scribbling notes on a sheet of paper. "Oh no," the man said. Seeing the chief's disappointment, he smiled. "But it will draw them to us. Unfortunately," he went on, looking from the cluttered workbench, "this equipment isn't really mobile." He clicked his lung as he considered. "Play it again," he ordered. The note that played was neither high nor low, but a pleasing sound somewhere in between. The Scruffy man frowned as he considered. "About 440 Hertz, he murmured. "Would you say that was D?" he asked, "or possibly C sharp?" "I really don't know," the chief admitted. Never mind," the man said. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a long tube with holes in it. He put it to his lips, covered some of the holes with his finger, and blew. The note that came out of the tube was exactly the same as the note the devices arranged on. "Perfect," the man said, lowering the tube. "It's a recorder," he explained. "I'm quite good with it, even if I do say so myself." He hesitated. "I'm not sure my friends Jamie and Zoe would necessarily agree, but never mind. Now, let's go back to that walkway around the hall and play Hunt the Cybermat." They returned to the part of the corridor where the first Cybermat had been hiding. The Scruffy man looked around, nodded, then put his musical pipe to his lips and blew. A single pure note rang out, loud and clear, through the station. The chief was not really sure what the Scruffy man expected to happen. It all seemed quite mad to him. But, as he and the guards who had come with them watched, the Cybermen started to appear. At first there were no flash of silver. Then, slowly, they all emerged from hiding. The creatures slid out of the darks and shadows. They crawled up from beneath the walkway and down the sides of the walls. Smiling as he continued to play, the man started to move with the walkway, and the Cybermen followed him. Drawn to the sound of the Scruffy man's musical note, more and more of the metal creatures joined the line of silver that stretched behind him. Finally, when the strange procession had been all the way around the other hall, and the chief was sure there couldn't be no more of the creatures, the Scruffy man led the Cybermen to the secondary aft loft. This was where the chief had decided the men should bring them. The area had not been used for years, and the station wouldn't miss it. Guards opened the main access hatch. It was rusty and stiff, with both age and lack of use. As soon as it was open, the man marched inside, still playing his constant note. The Cybermen swept around him, like a great metal river. They followed the man across the huge empty space to the far side of the hold. Then the music changed. The sound from a recorder warbled between several notes. The Cybermen swung around, disoriented and confused. As they turned back and forth, the Scruffy man broke into a run and headed back to the main arch. Slowly, the Cyberman began to realize what was happening, and turned to follow the man. He kept running, no longer playing the recorder. Behind him, the Cyberman seemed to sense where he was, and started back across the hold after him. "Oh, my giddy aunt!" the man exclaimed distressfully as he ran. "Quickly, close the hatch as soon as I'm through." The chief hurried to help the guards swing the cumbersome door back into place. Not a moment too soon, the Scruffy man dives through the narrowing gap. The nearest Cyberman leaped after him just as the chief and the guard slammed the hatch shut. They heard a loud clang as the Cyberman collided with the other side of the heavy metal door. The Scruffy man stood wiping his forehead with a grubby handkerchief. "They won't stay here for long," he told the chief. "You have to move quickly." Already, the guards were at work on the section's locking clamps. As soon as he primed, the chief gave the order. The section was sealed off, and the clamps blown up. Without the clamps to secure it in place, the whole of the secondary aft-roll detached from the main station. It drifted slowly away from Station Hamlyn, with the Cybermen still inside. On the central screen of the station control room, the chief and the Scruffy man watched a close-up view of the detached section as it drifted away. Already, the Cybermen were burrowing through the exterior. Gleams of silver caught the starlight as creatures began to tear their way out. As soon as the hold was far enough away from the station, the chief gave another order. The main X-ray laser swung around to aim at the detached section. Then, it fired. The screens that the chief and the Scruffy men were watching displayed only static as the hold was blasted to pieces. "And that's the end of your Cybermat," the Scruffy man said quietly. "The Cybermen won't try that again." "Thank you," the chief said. He turned to face the men. "I think that leaves only one thing to be sorted out." "You." The Scruffy man looked startled. "Me? But I don't need sorting out." "I want to know who you are and how you came here," the chief said. "How did you get past our defense shields? Why are you here?" The man thought. "I suppose I do owe you a few explanations," he agreed. "The answers to all your questions are in that large blue box you found with me." The chief's guard had been unable to open the blue box. When the chief mentioned this to the man, he simply smiled and said that he had a key, but he refused to hand it over, explaining that it would only work for him. "You have to know exactly how to use it. My TARDIS, that is, the box, has no ordinary lock, you know," he told the chief. So the chief and several of his guards led the man back to his blue box. They watched as he unlocked the door. "I promised you answer," he said, "but I'm afraid it may not be quite the answer you're expecting." In fact, he admitted, it might only raise a few more questions in your mind. Then, before the chief or any of the guards could follow him in, he stepped inside the box and closed the door behind him. "It's all right," the chief told the guard. "It's not as if it can go anywhere." But the chief's words were drowned out by the sudden scraping, trumpeting sounds that echoed from the box. Then, slowly as the chief and his guard watched in disbelief, the blue box faded away and disappeared.